Welcome to this session of the StateRAMP Exchange. My guests today are Doug Robinson, the Executive Director of the National Association of State CIOs, and Jim Weaver, the President of NASCIO and the CIO for the state of North Carolina. Doug, Jim, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Jason.
Today, we continue our conversation about StateRAMP, but more specifically, we're really focused on the impact that this is having, this cloud security effort is really having across the country, throughout different states, different counties, municipalities, and really taking what the federal side has done with FedRAMP and applying it more broadly and really providing the benefits that come with this standardization. So I'm going to start with Doug on this first question. A recent survey from NASCIO found state CIOs actually are accelerating their adoption of cloud services. Maybe discuss some of those modernization trends you're seeing from that survey, or even more broadly as you meet and talk with CIOs.
Sure, Jason. This is kind of a long-standing evolution. Go back, probably 2009, 2010, when cloud services first appeared on the state CIO top 10 priorities, and it's just simply accelerated. At one point, it was number 2 and 3 and priorities for state CIOs for several years. And it's interesting as we've seen as we have broader cloud adoption, more experience, more maturity, more the range of services that are being provided and new capabilities. We now see, interestingly enough, that cloud is less of a priority because it's simply become part of the standard operating procedures. As one CIO said in our survey, it's just the water we're swimming in today. And so it is clearly a significant part of their modernization efforts, along with several others. But if you look at the cloud adoption, which is now certainly extremely high, all states are doing something in cloud, either private on-premise or in most cases third-party off-premise cloud services. What you see is they're coupling that with a number of other opportunities. It may be things like looking at their data center footprint and making cases for closing down physical data centers so they can move to off-premise cloud solutions. But states still have a significant technical debt. Our other modernization and application modernization study showed that 50% of the applications that are currently residing in state government and being used would be considered a legacy environment. So they need to be modernized in a number of ways, particularly those that are citizen facing. They need to basically adopt, more modern interfaces and unified front end. So I'm sure that North Carolina, and I know that they're embarked on a number of those things. So cloud has simply become part of the DNA now of what every state CIO has to manage within their state environment.
Yeah, and I would add to Doug's comments there. If you think about the NASCIO top 10 that was released, cyber and digital transformation topped the list. And so when I talk about digital transformation, it really encompasses connectivity, which is essentially broadband. You have the cyber component, you have the privacy component, and then you have the legacy modernization component, which is basically saying the same thing, the transition to the cloud. What stops us a lot of times from being able to enable digital transformation opportunities is the back-end systems that are there basically at the forefront of supporting constituent services. And so the best way for us to be able to move forward is to look at those opportunities to re-architect the application, to take advantage of what the cloud has to offer, as opposed to continue to do the same old stuff of building it on-prem, investing in infrastructure for a 5-year period, and having that ongoing legacy debt that we have to maintain. I think the other thing that we're seeing too with our IT modernization trends is, while I will tell you I'm a fan of the hybrid approach, not necessarily everything in the cloud, we also recognize the fact that there comes a point in time, just like your automobiles, where you have to put significant investments back into the infrastructure, aka the building. And so I think we're all coming to a point in time now where, from a capital aspect, we're seeing the necessary investments that need to go back into a facility. And that's probably not the best use of those dollars, when those dollars could get redirected to other modernization opportunities to get us to a better outcome for the citizens we serve.
I'm going to go back to something that Doug said, and maybe even Jim comment on this. 50% of the apps currently residing in state government are considered legacy environment. That sounds low to me. Like, that's actually seems like a pretty good news story in many regards. I mean, if you talk to a lot of the folks in federal side, a lot of their legacy is, they're spending what they call, operations and maintenance O&M, something effective 70 to 75 to 80%. Now I know that 50% is not all about O&M, but is that considered high from your perspective, or it just shows, hey, there's still a ton of work to do?
Well, from the national perspective, it was about what I expected, but what we didn't do, and I certainly could get into the data with you, if what we wouldn't talk about is what does that mean in terms of those large critical benefit and entitlement systems, and the challenge is that, and I'll use things like unemployment insurance, which we've seen as a great example of the need for modernization. So you might have it might be 50% of the state's portfolio. You're right, states are still spending 70, 80% or even more on the O&M side, but in some cases, it's not the percentage, it's the fact that it's the magnitude of those applications that need to be modernized because they hit so many citizens. So, some of them are discrete. It might be licensing and professional occupations, and it might be smaller areas, but overall, the big bang systems are the ones that really need to be modernized. They have the largest impact. In some cases, those are 3 to 5 year modernization journeys. And so, we're looking at those as being significant investments. What has happened along the way, you go back just even 5 or 6 years, there weren't market solutions for things like enterprise tax and revenue, enterprise budgeting. These have now all come to the marketplace where states have different options besides what we have always called the owner operator model, which has been the traditional model of state government for decades. We own everything on-prem in data centers, and we write all the applications and we support them and we deploy them and then we rewrite them. That owner operator model is clearly now devolved into this, as Jim said, along with cloud, is also this hybrid model where you have a mix of cloud and software as a service solutions that are now available in the marketplace from the third-party partners. And so I think that has given states the option. So they're focusing now much more on being, OpEx experts instead of CapEx. They're looking at how to get rid of some of their physical facilities because they require long-term investments.
And Jason, it's Jim. I would just add on to Doug's comments there along the lines that the pandemic did spur a number of opportunities for us to be able to, in a very agile, quick fashion set, get things moving where capacity really was a key component when you think about disease reporting systems and things that public health entities needed to have access to, the sheer volumes of data that was coming in and had to be made available. Systems that were designed for positive test results, but now we also had to report on the negative test results, which is they were never seen or constructed in a manner to be able to account for that. But where we're at now, to what Doug was saying, is I think we're now getting to the more complicated, complex systems, the benefit systems, the DMV systems, the taxation systems. We've been able to probably to some degree ride through the needed changes for unemployment systems as a result of the pandemic. But the other caveat here too now is that we're going to start seeing probably less federal funds being made available for some of these initiatives, unlike what we've seen over the last 4 years as a result of the pandemic. And that might start stymieing us a little bit as to how quickly we can move forward, because now it's going to probably be more incumbent upon budgeting and the cycling through our state legislatures, our governor's budget office requests, those kind of things, and IT now getting back into the priority scheme of all the other things that a state government has to take a look at.
I think the unemployment is a great example. I know the Labor Department and the federal side, the U.S. Labor Department, put out a new kind of strategy around helping states continue to modernize their unemployment system. So I know that's been a big area. I want to move over a little bit towards talk a little bit about the cloud itself and StateRAMP. One of the benefits, obviously, of expanding the adoption of cloud services is this agile approach. But at the same time, you want to serve customers better, but at the same time, you got to be secure. So, Jim, talk a little bit about the StateRAMP process itself. Why is it beneficial? Give me just a little bit from a CIO's perspective in a state.
Well, first and foremost, I mean, we were very appreciative when FedRAMP was announced because that really did establish those guidelines, that criteria. So when we were dealing with vendors who were FedRAMP certified, we already kind of knew capabilities, requirements, what in fact they were able to deliver on in a proven fashion. Not everything we do at a state level, though, needs to be FedRAMP. And so when StateRAMP came along, it was nice to have, I don't want to say to the level of degree that FedRAMP was, but a subset of that allowed us to be able to move forward with maybe things that aren't as critical, that require that higher level of certification process. And having vendors go through the StateRAMP process and get certified in that regard was very beneficial for us. In North Carolina, we never looked to do our own thing. I know my colleague in Texas, Manny Crawford, they have TexRAMP, but we're not the size of Texas and we don't have that capability. So we're very much looking and are part of StateRAMP and leveraging what StateRAMP has to offer when we look at the vendor community and who has gone through that certification process. But when it comes to security, at the end of the day, a bad app's a bad app. And so whether that bad application is hosted on-prem or hosted in the cloud, it is still vulnerable. So I think it's incumbent upon us to get a partner with the right vendor who can understand our business, integrate with us very nicely, and help drive us along so we're continuing to do the right things at the right times and doing our utmost to protect our citizen data and any vulnerabilities that might be seen or determined in an application. The other nice thing about being in the cloud is that we're going to be constantly having to evolve. We're going to have to constantly refresh. We're going to have to constantly be looking at how the technology world is changing and adapting and sustaining what those changes are. Whereas, as you know, on-prem, a lot of times things just sit there because they're running, and it's a different conversation with the program people. They're being forced to choose between, do I spend $1 on my program or do I spend $1 on my IT system? Well, I'm going to go spend my dollar on my program. It's working. Why do I care, right? At the end of the day, benefits going out the door, whatever the case may be. And so we want to make sure now that that decision's being taken, I don't want to say taken away from them. Go spend your dollar on the program. Let us do from an IT aspect and work with the supplier community to make sure that your applications are sustainable and are where they need to be within a cloud hosted environment. So we see a lot of advantages in that regard, as well as then the accountability, the transparency, a lot of those things that we need when you start talking about risk management and how we look at overall at a risk management framework for the state.
Doug, I'll offer you the same question from a more broader perspective. NASCIO, I'm sure, works closely with StateRAMP. When I've obviously did some research before our conversation today, I found obviously a lot of interactions between your two groups. Talk a little bit about, from the NASCIO perspective, what StateRAMP has meant and why it came about maybe at the right time.
You're right. The timing was good, and NASCIO and me individually, I was involved since the inception of that before it was even called StateRAMP. We were having conversations about the value, essentially the utility of having security addressed in a more comprehensive way. And as Jim said, you wanted that kind of harmonization, which states need. But that really came from a lot of our surveys, particularly the last two that we've partnered with Accenture on in cloud services, Capitals on the Cloud series that we did. And what was interesting is we saw this significant shift of surveys and data that we had collected a dozen years ago from state CIOs. We asked the question, what's the major impediment or barrier to broader cloud adoption? And the number one answer was, we're concerned about security. So fast forward to 2023, we asked the same question, and security is still top of mind, but the responses have essentially flipped, and that 74%, so 3/4 of the CIOs responding to our 2023 survey said that they considered security the most important benefit of cloud computing. So we've seen this huge shift about their concern, and part of that was, and this is really where it gets the kind of linkage to StateRAMP, 87% said that they agreed that cybersecurity offered by third-party cloud providers is either on par or better than the security measures in place in state government. So that was a huge shift in understanding and recognition, in addition to the investments that many of the cloud service providers, the CSPs, have put into their platforms in attempting to meet StateRAMP or complying with StateRAMP, but also the fact that they had to again adjust their offerings to meet the compliance of the various federal regulatory requirements, such as CJIS for criminal justice and IRS 1075 for tax records, and on down the list. they had met the demand from the marketplace. So security has now, become the cloud characteristic that mattered most to state CIOs. That's sort of the big shift. So that's where you see StateRAMP kind of fit in, and we saw accelerated cloud adoption during the pandemic because there was a compelling need, because states needed a speed to solution kind of market adjustment. They had the governors and other public officials saying, we need to deliver this solution to citizens very, very quickly. We need to scale it to millions of citizens very quickly, and we need to do this in a cost-effective manner. And so I think that's what you see. So now the states are definitely invested in the cloud solutions, whether it's on-prem or off. And one of the things they need is that, I guess, confidence that they meet the security demands, and StateRAMP can provide that as a independent, neutral, kind of third-party arbitrator of doing that, and it addresses a lot of the constraints that the states currently have to deal with.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, I think the cloud makes us stay current and relevant. So you would not see a 2008 based application moving to the cloud. I guarantee you they're sitting in someone's on-prem data center.
Doug, it's interesting the shift that's happened. I don't say it's surprising, and you and I have been covering this a long time. And yeah. I remember the days when people were hesitant to move to the cloud because of security. And now the shift happened that said they are, as you said, one of the most important characteristics of moving to the cloud is the security. I'll either Doug or Jim, why do you think that happened? Is it just time? Is it part of the natural occurrence that, hey, the more I use this, the more comfortable I get? Or was there a moment where, oh, that there was that epiphany for state CIOs, and everyone's different, and I get that, but what would you say was when did that shift start to happen, and maybe even could you put your finger on some of the reasons why?
Yeah, I'm going to say I'll give you the reason why from our data, and it was the technical expertise, what I'll call the kind of the capabilities and disciplines of the existing state IT workforce. CIOs recognized that they did not have that, and that was that's from our survey data. When we asked that question, what has been the challenge here, and they said, well, we don't have the cloud expertise in our organization to be able to do this without partnering with someone else. And I think that's going to continue to erode across the states. And I think it's interesting is that the workforce expertise is the same challenge around cybersecurity. It's the same challenge around applications modernization. It's the same challenge about delivering digital services and digital transformation. It's interesting. The common theme across all those from the CIOs is we don't have the capabilities with our current workforce to do that. Obviously, the next watershed is all about Gen AI, and our survey, exact same response. We said, what's going to be your impediment to broader adoption of Gen AI? Workforce capabilities, skills, expertise. And so I'll let Jim answer for North Carolina, but that's what we're seeing on a national basis.
Yeah, Jason, I was going to just add there that what I think occurred is pandemic basically drove innovation. It drove opportunity. It fundamentally changed the way agencies may have had to look at how they did business during that time frame. And as a result of that, I think that's really what the epiphany was, where we cannot continue to do what we've always done. We need to go pivot and go and do some other things. And again, we were all trying to solve the same problems nationally. I can't tell you, I mean, at the time of the pandemic, I was in the state of Washington. We were taking stuff from Minnesota. I know Georgia was taking stuff from us. We were all sharing. So not only were we learning from each other, but then to Doug's point, you started getting those platform as a service opportunities out there where we could sit there basically and start building on something new. And I think what we learned in that was how tangled our architecture truly was. As much as we thought we understood our architecture, did not realize the spaghetti mess, if you want to think of it that way, of everything intertwined that really existed. I can recall as we were trying to move again in another state our disease reporting system, it was not a application, it was about 30 applications that had to move in tangent with it. And so that was eye-opening to many. We did get it done, But now that they're there, the ability for them to be more agile and to be able to pivot in different directions is now in place. So I think the flexibility that was provided to the business via the cloud is really going to be the game changer moving forward. As we also see the onslaught, I'll use that word, of generative AI, it's coming. It's here already in some degree. And the key to generative AI is going to be around our data. And so how we make our data available, how we, have the capacity, how we do the analytics across our data and make sure we have good quality data for that whatever generative AI tools or tool sets that we're using. A lot of those tool sets are going to be running cloud. They're going to be running natively in the cloud. It's hard pressed to go find a generative AI tool that's going to run on-prem. So we have to, again, rethink about what our approaches are. And at the end of the day, we're here to support the business community of our state, which is our state agencies. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get in front of them, have the most flexibility. And that's what the cloud truly does have to offer.
I was hoping we could get through a day without having to talk about AI, but here we are.
Can't
I
do
think
it's not AI, it's generative AI. We've been doing AI in the States for a long time. So it's generative AI.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But still, I was hoping. One of the things, and this is actually one of the questions I was putting some questions together for a different interview that just came up is we know cloud is a tool. It's a tool to the bigger goals here. Having something like StateRAMP, having something like a set of standards for security, what does that do, Jim, for you as you're going down the path of digital transformation in the cloud? There's a peace of mind. It's what does this do? Does it get you moving faster? Give me a sense of the kind of the long tail that something like StateRAMP provides.
Well, again, StateRAMP provides that vendor community to us who has gone through the certification aspects. So we know that we're already getting a certified platform that's meeting certain requirements. As a state, we've adopted NIST standards. So when you think about cyber, privacy, risk management, we are very much embedded into leveraging the NIST standards across the enterprise here in North Carolina. And that's basically our go back or fall back to ultimately at the end of the day. And again, most of the federal entities who are going to come in and do auditing are going to be auditing based upon NIST standards. So we just got to understand that connection there. But within the cloud framework, I mean, like I said, again, when you think about the cyber standards that have to be met, that very much aligns to what we're trying to do. So it's not other things that we need to go do. We can now go focus on other opportunities because someone's already done the vetting out, if you will, in that process. So as an example, from an IT procurement aspect, if someone comes in and says they're StateRAMP, FedRAMP, that automatically is checking a number of the boxes that we do not need to go back and show me this, show me that, those kind of types of opportunities. We already know what we have in play, and it just simplifies the process for us as far as vendor selection, getting contracts done, and then moving on to the development production type work.
I guess, Jim, let me try to maybe you answer my question, but let me go one piece deeper. Because you have this in place, there's a burden that's taken off of you and your workforce. At least I hope, right? You say, okay, vendor X, they say they're went through the StateRAMP process and have this certification. You do your due diligence of that vendor, but it also saves you weeks, hours, days. Give me a sense of that. It gets you to that, as you said, simplifies the process for us, gets you to that DevSecOps, that development side much quicker.
Jason, I think if I understand your question, I don't think we've actually have looked at the measurement of that to see what kind of a time saving there is. At the end of the day, we ultimately have ownership of that application, even if it's running on platforms of service. It's our application, it's our state's data. And so we still have the fiduciary responsibility of doing the things that we need to do out there from an ongoing production aspect. So whether it's cyber, privacy, whatever, working in collaboration with our selected partner on that. But I would say probably where we've seen the biggest turnaround or time-saving improvement is really through the procurement process. If a vendor is able to come in and say, I'm FedRAMP, StateRAMP, like I said, that checks a lot of boxes for us right off the bat. So as we're going into negotiations, these are not things that we have to go dive down on, do a deep dive. we already can move on to more important discussions.
Yeah, and Jason, I don't see this. I mean, this is very valuable to the states, but this is in line with what has been going on with the states for 30 plus years or more, where and I certainly in my former role at the state, we did the same thing, which in your architectural direction, your enterprise architecture, you incorporate, we called it incorporating by reference, so that you don't have to again take all the burden on in the state, and you want to go to a recognized standards body. Jim already mentioned NIST. Every state references NIST in one way or another. ISO for standards, IEEE for standards, 508 for accessibility. States have been doing this for years, so they incorporate other bodies of work that they find, that have high degrees of integrity, that have high degrees of credibility, and said, we're going to do that. The states, early on all began to adopt the NIST cybersecurity framework. We were really a big advocate of that over a dozen years ago when it came out. And we continue to promote that as adoption. And so we can see that this benefits the states because, again, they can then have confidence, but they have to be in the game, as Jim said. They just can't do that. They have to continually monitor that. And I think states that are doing that well, again, are looking to those outside standards bodies that have a rigorous process and saying, we agree that we can use that rather than develop that on our own. And that, again, will align with procurement over time, where the solicitations that come out, as they have for many years, are going to simply say, if you're replying to this bid or this RFP, your proposal must align with our architecture and must be, in this case, StateRAMP compliant if we're looking for cloud services. I see that's the end game for this, and we know there's a gap in the capabilities of the states. So why not, again, use these services, again, as long as there's a trusted process and it's transparent and you have constant review, and the update is always going to be a challenge. You already have Rev 5 out on the NIST cyber standards, and so that's going to be part of the due diligence that will take place over time so that the states can continue to trust the process.
One thing that occurred to me during this conversation is this idea of reciprocity. In the federal world, and I'll do a quick comparison, if HHS approves a cloud provider through the kind of the agency authorization process, Interior, who may or may not want to use it, they may have to go through their own process. But if the Joint Authorization Board, the head of FedRAMP, approves it, everyone can use it and everyone feels good about it. Does StateRAMP have those same issues around reciprocity, or is it there's one process, which is the StateRAMP process, versus North Carolina has a process that then Florida could use or not use? What's the connection between reciprocity?
The StateRAMP process needs to be adopted. So the state needs to have an affirmation that they're going to approve and agree to the terms and conditions of StateRAMP and the way they do things. I don't see any reciprocity between the states that'll be necessary. It'll be the state of North Carolina agreeing to StateRAMP. Now, they may have their own tweaks that they have to do to, but I think the basics of that will be adopted by the states. The major thing is that really, and you think of the marketplace, that really helps the supplier community. That helps the vendor and corporate, the cloud service providers. The StateRAMP process helps them tremendously because they have this now set of uniform terms and conditions and uniform standards around that cloud service that they know is consistent for the state. So once they have that approved, they don't have to deal with all the differences of 50 plus state and territorial jurisdictions. And that's essentially what has been taking place for many, many years across this environment, is that states have each developing on their own, and there's then inconsistency. So in this sense, it removes, I think, a lot of friction from their responses to solicitations.
So even though StateRAMP does certify vendors in a specific way, at the end of the day, there are things that are going to be specific within a state in the terms and conditions. So as an example, cyber liability insurance, or what is a vendor potentially on the hook for, that will vary from state to state. It's 2x, potentially in North Carolina, 2x the cost of the project. Now that can be negotiated in different ways, but just coming out of the gate. So it's kind of hard to do that reciprocal type of agreement. But what we would do, though, is, as you know, and across same with the federal agencies, if Virginia was using a vendor and we were interested in using that vendor, obviously I'd be talking to my colleague in Virginia about pros, cons, things of that nature. And then, looking at what those opportunities would be and how that would align, or what we would need to do to make alignment for interaction here in North Carolina.
Doug, Jim, we've been talking a lot about StateRAMP. We've talked a lot about the cloud. Let's just take maybe a pull out from that all discussion for a second and say, we know that there's a lot still to be done within states, just like the federal world. There's a never-ending challenge. You're always continuing forward. When you look back, when you look forward, what are some of those challenges that you still feel like states need to overcome when we talk about moving workloads, applications to the cloud, modernization, digital transformation? Jim, you mentioned funding as a good example earlier on. I think that's always going to be a challenge. But are there things that next level down outside of funding that you'd point to, that you'd say, hey, here's the next thing we're really trying to deal with?
Well, Jim mentioned it in a sense, and that I think this is a continuing challenge of the states, and I call it the Baskin-Robbins architecture. And so the spend in a lot of states in IT, that spend is being consumed by diversity and complexity. So the states, they have 31 flavors of everything, particularly even areas where there's a common business process. So I look at things like case management. States can have 50, 100 different case management systems. I think that's the next major challenge, and has been for a while, and states are slowly working through this, but I think that's going to continue to be a challenge, is rationalizing all the differences that exist and making a case for, we need to get a handle, on this. We need to enterprise funding. And that's when the CIO and the leadership can play a really strong role, is can say, we can go for some modernization funds or an innovation fund, and we can address that Baskin-Robbins complexity across all the agencies. Right now, it's only viewed in that enterprise portfolio management kind of approach. And once you get a handle on that, then you realize that you do have that diversity and complexity that needs to be addressed. That's going to take years to get through the backlog of all of that. And I think while you're doing that, you will continue to have, like I already mentioned, the common theme across all these discussions, which is, do we have the capabilities? Do we have the workforce to work on that and to manage that? And we're seeing that. We're talking right now about next gen enterprise architecture. What's the big shift? What's the future of EA in the States? And really, it's more about the Lego model, right, as opposed to certainly the older approach to having that detailed case. I think in the future it's going to be more of we're gonna have modularity, and we're gonna put these Lego pieces together to provide functionality. That creates a whole new set of challenges for the state, but also tremendous opportunities for them to modernize quickly. So I think we'll see that as the marketplace brings that innovation, the states can take advantage of that and adopt it.
I'll go in a couple different directions here, Jason, on your question. So first, talk about the workforce challenge. We have a responsibility to our workforce. We're changing their roles, we're changing their jobs. We're going to be moving them from day-to-day operational components and putting them into other areas of opportunity. So if you want to think about, to Doug's point, enterprise architecture, program management, supplier management, project management, and the list will go on in those areas. So shifting them over more to the strategic aspects, if you will, of IT, as opposed to the day-to-day aspects of IT. And not everybody who's in the day-to-day world will transition over into this other world. So we have to make sure that we're addressing any workforce issues, that we're providing the necessary tooling, assignments, and setting them up for success rather than for failure. We also got to be able to change the culture of how we go about IT. If you're going to continue to do what you do on-prem in the cloud, it's not going to be cost beneficial for you. You have to start looking at things a little bit differently, such as, do you need your development environments running 24/7, 365? Are you willing to shut things down on the weekend or spin them back up? The things that the cloud is very good at doing, but we have to be good stewards and actually go through and execute on those scripts, if you will, and make sure that we're not hindering the business, but also not sitting there and letting the electric meter continue to run. We have a lot of education to do across the financial community in our agency. So chief financial officers, having them understand how this works. And the fact that, you know, if you have $1,000 set aside and you now spend 1,001, guess what happens? The electric company shuts off the meter. And so that potentially happens here as well. And that makes it more challenging for states like our state, North Carolina, that works off of a biannual budget process, not an annual budget process. So the opportunities to adjust to account for capacity increases. One may be a natural event that occurs in the state that all of a sudden drives business a certain way, i.e. maybe a pandemic or something like that. That can have a phenomenal impact on the ability to be able to sustain that cloud environment that you're doing right now without having some additional funding coming in. We also got transition costs to account for as well. And a lot of times across the finance community, they're not aware of, I'm spending X and you're telling me I'm going to save money over here. That's how they're looking at the picture. They're not looking at this cost ramp up before you can get back down to those cost savings. And so as it takes longer and longer to transition as Doug said, 3 to 5 years, that's 3 to 5 years of increased costs until you get to the promised land and you're able to take advantage of what the cloud has to offer. And then I would say the other thing that we have to be just recognize is as we enter into a strategic relationship, we also got to think about what's the exit strategy from that strategic relationship as well, so we don't get lock-in. And so then the more I'll use the term, the more we go native and we start taking advantage of things native to the cloud, that could in fact by default lock us into a particular service, a particular vendor. And we just have to be extremely careful that we do have the ability for an exit strategy to maybe pivot and go somewhere else. You know, I hate to say that as we enter a relationship, we're looking at an exit strategy, but let's be honest. You know, today we're dealing with the best possible account team in the world. And 5 years from now, the account team totally changes and is a totally different relationship, or it's a different pricing structure or whatever the case may be. So as a state, we need that flexibility to be able to look to see what gets us the best value. Because at the end of the day, we're spending taxpayer funds. And so, as I like to say, we're here for the best outcome for North Carolinians. And so I think those are some of the challenges that maybe we're not mature enough yet on. But those are things that we're looking to learn not only by ourselves, but also looking across our peers across the country and seeing what they're doing.
This is what keeps your jobs fun. Doug, Jim, you have so many challenges ahead of you, so many opportunities as well. And unfortunately, though, we are out of time for this session of the StateRAMP Exchange. So let me thank my guests. Doug Robinson is the Executive Director of the National Association of State CIOs. Doug, always a pleasure to catch up. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And Jim Weaver is the President of NASCIO and the CIO for the state of North Carolina. Jim, thank you as well for taking the time.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the StateRAMP Exchange.